what was lost there continues to be lost in America and has been at the throat of the battle for compensation, for rectification, for rehabilitation, for reparations to the damage done, not only to the African American community, but to this country.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Our Voices Matter podcast. I'm your host, Linda Lorelle. The aftermath of George Floyd's murder is forcing our country at long last to reckon with its history of racism, or at least begin to. As our conversations continue and we seek to help our white friends and colleagues understand the roots of Black America's anger and exhaustion, it's important to focus on parts of history that have long been overlooked and ignored. Even today, many Americans, including Black Americans, don't know that there was once a thriving community known as Black Wall Street. 99 years ago, in 1921, it was burned to the ground in what was known as the Tulsa Race Riot. But it wasn't a riot, it was a massacre. My guest today produced and directed a documentary 12 years ago that captured interviews with the survivors. His goal was to raise awareness, gain compensation, and seek justice on their behalf while they were still with us. The name of the documentary is Before They Die. Please welcome to the show, Reggie Turner, founder and executive director of the Tulsa Project.
Reggie, really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience more about something that I know is near and dear to your heart. You've been living within the world of this Tulsa Race Massacre for over 13 years now. You produced the film 12 years ago. What drew you to it in the first place?
Well, the whole focus that we've directed, that America is now being directed to, comes as a result of our mutual Stanford colleague and friend, Charles Ogletree, who was recruited to represent the living survivors when he went to Tulsa on a book tour. As a side to the book tour, he was pulled into a room and introduced to some VIPs who spent the next several hours telling him their tales of the Tulsa Race Riot, as it was called at that point, and the atrocities that they and their families had suffered as a result of the riot. Charles, despite being a highly educated and proud Black man, had never heard of the Tulsa Race Riot. And rather than admit to that lapse in his knowledge, excused himself to the restroom and called me on his cell phone for me to give him some notes on the Tulsa Race Riot. It was a call of futility because I hadn't heard of it either. And I then proceeded to do a Google search. And back then it was on dial-up, so that was not something that was quick. So he sat in a toilet stall for 20 minutes while I was trying to find something that turned out did not exist on the internet at that time. So he went back to the meeting and simply listened, and then came out with an agreement that he would represent the group. Once he had made that commitment, we started working together and talking about what we could do about it. And he assembled a dream team of lawyers who were all practitioners in civil rights and in litigation, high-level litigation, and brought them together to create this dream team and to represent the 151 living survivors at that time.
So before we get into the legality of it, let's back up now and just try to give our audience a brief synopsis of what happened. So it was May 31st, of 1921. And there was some sort of an incident that happened between a white female elevator operator and a black male, young black male, who, according to one of the survivors in your film, literally tripped and fell into this woman. And when white onlookers saw it, they accused him of assaulting her, and that's what started it. And pick it up from there in terms of what happened and how what is known as Black Wall Street, the Greenwood area of Tulsa, was burned to the ground.
Well, I'm going to tell you the story as it has been told for 100 years, with the caveat that the project that I'm currently working on tells the other side of the story that has been buried for 100 years. So I will tell you what your audience needs to know, and then they'll see my new project and learn what really happened. So,
well, that's a tease. That's a hell of a tease. Okay, well, go for it.
I'm a storyteller and a salesman.
Yeah.
So what happened was, allegedly, the elevator stopped short and Dick Rowland was tossed, stumbled physically into Sarah Page. And they were both startled by the jolt, and his collision with her caused her to scream. Not scream like I'm in pain, not scream like I'm in danger.
Just startled.
Not scream like help me, just startled. Mm-hmm. She yelped.
Right.
And then the doors opened to the elevator, and there were standing white patrons and white residents of the building who were familiar, of course, with her because this is what she did daily, and they rode the elevator multiple times during the day. Heard her yelp as the door opened and yelled immediately epithets towards, get away from her, nigga, what did you do, blah, blah, blah. Dick, seeing a crowd of people there reacting that way to him, did what probably any young black man would have done at that time. He ran. He tried to get away. And he did successfully escape before the police came. Well, when the police came, the crowd told their story, which was that he had assaulted her. He was trying to rape her. Sarah Page herself never accused him of trying to rape her, and in fact refused to file charges that he had even assaulted her. So Dick was formally never charged because the so-called complainant would not sign the complaint. But the mere notion of a black man had laid hands on, assaulted, even if accidentally, a white woman was the spark that was needed to light the flame that was already building in racially tensioned Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time.
And again, the year is 1921. The Klan was very active. It's also worth noting that at this time, Oklahoma, and this town in particular, was an oil and gas town, and there was a depression going on. There was high unemployment. A lot of people who, white people in the community had lost jobs. And then this black community that had been built and was self-sustaining, and the people who lived there, the 10,000 blacks who lived there, owned their land, and they were sitting on oil, right? So that's a backdrop, and that is a part of so just putting it out there so people know. Okay, so what happens is the white folks get angry and upset about this black man allegedly having raped this white woman who refused to file charges. And all hell breaks loose. And over the course of 2 days, they are shooting and killing going into people's homes, burning them down, shooting people on the spot. There are Black men who had fought in World War I who were armed and tried to fight back. So there was literally a shootout over a period of this 48 hours. And the town is burned. So I'll let you pick it up from there.
Well, beyond the confrontation it was done with the lawful, illegal cooperation of what was supposed to be the law enforcement in the city. These white men who were vigilantes, rioters, marauders, Klan members, were then summarily deputized by the police, given weapons. Store owners who sold weapons gave them weapons to go out. The armory was broken into, and all the weapons were given to these white folks. And they then went about shooting any Black person they saw for any reason. In fact, they didn't need a reason. Mm-hmm. Their job was just told, go shoot yourself. And that's according to the testimony of one of the living survivors who heard the admonishment, who saw it in action. That's what white people were doing. Mm-hmm. They were just shooting. And
because they could.
Because they could.
Because they could.
They had no fear of any kind of ramifications because the sheriff gave them the weapons.
Yeah.
They deputized them and told them, go do what you got to do.
That no fear of ramifications is, I just had a flash in my mind of George Floyd beneath the knee of Derek Chauvin. No fear in his eyes. Okay, back to Tulsa. Not only were Black Americans being assaulted, shot dead, burned, et cetera, on the ground, there was also an air assault from multiple airplanes that I believe in your documentary, it says that they were private. They were owned by private oil landowners. And I want to read just a little excerpt here. And this was authored by Oklahoma attorney Buck Colbert Franklin, who described what he saw. And this essay is actually in the African American History Museum in DC. And he wrote, "Lurid flames roared and belched and licked their forked tongues into the air. Smoke ascended the sky in thick black volumes, and amid it all, the planes, now a dozen or more in number, still hummed and darted here and there with the agility of natural birds of the air. Planes circling in midair. They grew in number and hummed, darted, and dipped low. I could hear something like hail falling upon the top of my office building. Down East Archer, I saw the old Midway Hotel on fire, burning from its top, and then another and another and another building began to burn from their top. The sidewalks were literally covered with burning turpentine balls. I knew all too well where they came from, and I knew all too well why every burning building first caught fire from the top. I paused and waited for an opportune time to escape. Where, oh, where is our splendid fire department with its half-dozen stations, I asked myself. Is the city in conspiracy with the mob? So I wanted to read that because I want our audience to be able to visualize what the horror of this was.
Well, I think, and we're going to do this constantly or frequently in this conversation, is reflect on the George Floyd situation.
George Floyd.
George Floyd situation. Sorry, George Floyd situation. Mm-hmm. And the public disobedience and protests that we've seen in our streets in the last several weeks is the media constantly showed if there were a police car on fire, if there were a building on fire, cameras remained fixed in that location, showing that, making sure everyone understood how violent and destructive that kind of action can be, and the damage that can be done. And you inevitably saw the fire trucks parked either down the street or battling those fires, or you would see them leaving, going to a fire somewhere else. In Tulsa, again, through our story, which is the survivors' stories, they talk about how they saw no fire trucks. The fire department was not coming into their neighborhood trying to quell the flames. Now think about this. Even though they lived in a segregated section of the city, they did not have their own fire department, nor did they have their own police department, because they lived in incorporated Tulsa. And so the fire department did not have the ability to choose and discriminate over which fires they would fight. Oh, we're not going to the black side of town. No.
Right. Okay.
Their job was to put out fires wherever they were.
But so not in this case. Yeah.
But they were nowhere to be found.
Mm.
Their trucks were still in the stations. Someone told them, let them burn.
Let them burn. Okay. So
it's those kind of experiences that helped move this conversation from the misnomer of race riots to the current term of massacre.
Right. Which just officially changed just 2 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
For so long we promoted that this was ethnic genocide. Mm-hmm. There was, there was no purpose to this other than the elimination of the successful African American community.
Okay, so let's talk about the survivors, and sadly, the ones. I mean, you started with 151 when you began this project, and they have all now passed away.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say it's one of the reasons that I named my film Before They Die, because that was our motivation. That was our methodology. The point in telling the story, the point of pursuing the legal case, seeking some kind of reparation. And under the legal definition, we mean to repair the damage. We were seeking to do that before they died.
That did not happen. Unfortunately, it went all the way to the Supreme Court, which refused to hear the case because of, the reason it had even gotten that far was they said, statute of limitations, what have y'all been doing for the last 80 years? Which just made my blood boil when I heard the Oklahoma prosecutor or district attorney, whatever.
Yes.
I mean, seriously? Okay. So statute of limitations had run out. So that's why we're denying it. It goes to the Supreme Court. This wonderful scene in your film with Charles Ogletree and the rest of the dream team on the steps of the Supreme Court with the survivors as they're about to go in and plead their case. And then the resulting interviews afterwards, when it became clear that the Supreme Court said, no, we're not even going to hear your argument. Go home. The feeling, the sense of deflation, you could feel it. And the resignation, but at the same time, it was almost like, okay, it was probably too good to be true to even think that we might actually get justice here. What do you remember most from those interviews with the survivors, especially after it became clear that the Supreme Court was not even going to hear the case?
Well, this is a minefield fraught with emotion for me, reminiscing about those times, because while we were fueled by hope and expectation of positive results for the survivors, as lawyers, we all had to reserve any enthusiasm about our chances because we were aware of the tremendous hurdles that our case faced. And it wasn't simply what the law said. We felt we were good on the law. It's why it's so important for people to get out and vote up and down the ballot, because it's those local and state races where they appoint the judges which hear our cases and make our decisions. Mm-hmm. And we knew that some of the jurists that we were going to face were not predisposed to opening this kettle of worms. And so it became difficult at times to properly gauge the survivors' expectations. Mm. Now, one of the things that is important for people to understand is that these people who were all between 85 and 100 when we started were not in this. Their motivation was never about how much money they were going to get. It wasn't about them getting rich as a result. We made no projections to them that we thought they could get $10,000 or $10 million. And I can't recall a single one of them asking me for an amount. They were so excited about having the opportunity to finally get their day in court and to tell their story, that wherever it led, wherever they ended up, was better than where they had been. What happened, though, is in those second generations, those heirs, they began to get unreasonable expectations. Mm-hmm. And we would hear, as I would have the survivors be in their homes and be on location around the country where we toured and took them for trial proceedings, I would hear from their families, when y'all think we gonna get paid? Or how much you think we gonna get? Have they put anything on the table? What have y'all turned down? And
as if an offer had been made, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or that, and I got this several times because my role as a filmmaker was different than as a part of the legal team. And so the energy was different, as well as the professional relationship. So there were things that they would not go and say to Charles or other members of the in-court legal team because they didn't want to piss people off. But they would say to me, like, maybe y'all are asking for too much. If y'all considered settling?
Yeah, but there was none of that. There was none of that was going on. There was really never any question.
There was never anything.
There was never
nothing was ever put on the table. Nothing.
Yeah. So
we would have settled for a day in court.
Yeah, just for the story to have been told publicly in the highest court in the land, or any court,
any court in the land,
any court. Right.
We lost at every level, which is one of the things that tempered the expectations. Was we hadn't had a victory and then a defeat to get deflated about. We hadn't had a victory. Our actually being in court, our having filed a petition was a victory.
Yeah, a victory. So I know several of the survivors lived well into their hundreds. I remember one, at least 105. Who was the last survivor, and when did that person pass?
Dr. Olivia Hooker died. I would say now it's been about 18 months. ago, and she was 105.
Wow. Wow.
Otis Clark lived to be 109.
Unbelievable. Wow. You know, so many companies are stepping up to help their communities through this challenging time. And here in Texas, one of those companies is HEB. The grocery giant has shown time and again that it knows how to handle a crisis, which is why it was ready to jump into action when the scope of the COVID-19 pandemic became apparent. The company's efforts and expertise were highlighted in a recent Texas Monthly article, quoting here, San Antonio-based HEB has been a steady presence amid the crisis. The company began limiting the amounts of certain products customers were able to purchase in early March, extended its sick leave policy, and implemented social distancing measures quickly, limited its hours to keep up with the needs of its stockers, added a coronavirus hotline for employees in need of assistance or information, and gave employees a temporary increase in mid-March. I've shopped at HEB from the moment they came to Houston almost 20 years ago. I'm proud to have them as a sponsor of this podcast. Thank you, HEB. So I want to kind of connect the dots between back then and today. But before I do that, you have to make good on your T's. So what is it that you have uncovered about the real story of what happened? Can you share that?
What I can share is that, again, the motivation behind Before They Die was to tell the survivors' stories and to demonstrate their efforts in the pursuit of justice for what they had witnessed and suffered from. The new piece reveals some of the stories, some of the history that the survivors shared with me. That is not in Before They Die because it was not about the pursuit of justice. It was, let me tell you some of the skullduggery that went on, or let me tell you what we lost, or let me tell you what really happened.
Right. So it more fully paints the picture of Greenwood and the families and how they built their wealth and what, kind of what the scenario was, it sounds like. The backstory, if you will.
The backstory.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. When we talk about the glory and success of Black Wall Street, that certainly is true. What we don't talk about and want to acknowledge is that there was an underbelly to Black Wall Street, an underbelly to Tulsa. Tulsa was the oil capital of the world at the time. It was also a largely outlaw-controlled town. It was the Wild, Wild West. So it was plenty of cat houses, gaming houses, illegal bars, all kinds of underbelly that takes place in any society. Mm-hmm. So while we point to the bright lights of what they were doing and they were accomplishing, there was a blue light district and things that were going on there that surprisingly, yes, mm-hmm. But there also had a level of skullduggery attached to it because racial mixing was legally prohibited. So there were Black people who were having relationships with white people undercover. And they, of course, did those in the cover of darkness on the dark side of town, rather than being discovered on the white side of town, committing the same crime. On the Black side of town, either people didn't care or could be made to go away and forget what they saw. On the white side of town, just as Dick Rowland ran for his life because he bumped into a white woman. If you had been found having sex with a white woman, how long do you think it would have been before you'd have been lynched? So the underbelly had to exist in a climate where there was still some prophylactic protection
Right.
for survival.
Right.
Part and parcel of that is you have to understand the history of the state of Oklahoma, going back to the Oklahoma land rush where people were given land. Just throw your stake down and claim it. That at the same time that this Oklahoma as a state was created to be a Native American and Black state. And the whole story of the Trail of Tears, which brought them to that part of the country. And they were given parcels of land for them to farm, for them to live. As they began to do that and began to, through forced segregation, do business with themselves and succeed, they began to learn not only how to survive, but how to flourish. And they began to rebel against some of the discrimination that they were facing. Black folks were not allowed in the oil industry. That was a white man's business until oil was found on Native American and African American lands. Then business was business. How do we get your oil? How do we get that property? There were fake marriages set up to get the transfer of parcels from Native Americans that had been gifted that land to white families that then went on to create established oil companies and to make billions of dollars off of those lands. There are properties that were acquired during the massacre that were clearly owned by Black people, Black families on the Black side of town, huge parcels of land that are in the hands of white people, white corporations today. How did that transfer take place?
Well, it was a grab. Yeah.
Yeah, no, after, I'm talking about, it was another grab.
Another grab. Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
So
is this what you're exploring in this new film?
Yes, what we're exploring and exposing. There are transfers where the owner of the land, there's no signature from the Black folks who own that property, transferring it. Where are the court records where there was an eminent domain proceeding that transferred the property? You know.
So, all
these are the stories that have yet to be told.
Right. And all of this, this history that was really denied and kind of swept under the rug for decades. Nobody talked about it. Nobody on either side wanted to really talk about it for different reasons, but nobody was talking about it. And so now when we, fast forward to kind of where we are today and some of the calls now as we move forward in the wake of these protests, and sort of the awakening of many white Americans to finally say, okay, I get it. I'm starting to see it now. I mean, it's kind of hard to ignore what happened to George Floyd. And now people are, starting to have these conversations about white privilege and try to understand the anger of the Black community and where it comes from. It comes from places like this. It comes from places like the Tulsa Race Massacre and the land grab and the decimation of a thriving Black community. It comes from places like that. And that's just one example. So now what I'm hearing from some people in the Black community that what we need to do, we Black Americans need to create a real economic base, similar, if you will, to Black Wall Street, where we have our own. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that, having, lived right in the middle of the history of what we've been talking about.
Well, there are a couple of things. From what I know happened in Tulsa and the cover-up of the atrocity for 80 years to what's taking place in our country right now, America is crumbling. Our relationships are crumbling. under the burden of truth. All of the things that are coming forth as a result of the truth being told. When you talk about white people who are now reacting and saying, okay, now I get it. It's them the truth being revealed to them. And they feel the burden of, oh my God, not only has this happened, but this has been happening for decades. And I've not paid attention. It's part of the problem that we've had with bringing the communities together in Tulsa is they're at the point where they can no longer deny and know that they cannot hide the massacre. That's the truth. But the burden of that truth is, what have you done about it? And they've not done nearly enough to compensate for the burden of the pain that they inflicted in that community and in this country. Imagine that this is Black Wall Street and the entrepreneurs who were there. There were more millionaires in a 6-block radius there than there was anywhere else in the country. If those progressive business people had been allowed to continue their business growth, their success, and to pass on and create generational wealth,
right?
The economic income gaps that we have in America would most likely not be as egregious as they are.
As they are, yep.
And think about it from a racial component as well, that if, for example, the Hooker family, Dr. Hooker's father and uncle, had multiple locations of their haberdashery stores. Their success of franchising, having multiple locations, was so powerful that the head of the Nordstrom family came to Tulsa to sit with them to understand how to create multiple locations and manage the size of your business economically to be able to make it worthwhile. So what if the Hookers became the Nordstroms?
What happened to the Hookers after Greenwood was burned down?
They opened up smaller businesses in other places, but the whole momentum that they had built up, their clientele that they've been up, their supply chain.
They were starting over.
And starting over with nothing.
With nothing.
So, but there are other businesses and opportunities that, had they been allowed to flourish and develop, it would have also changed what was the race relations in the country. Imagine if these companies grew and became multi-billion dollar industries. They would have been hiring white people. There would have been an affirmative action in reverse of white people working for Black-owned companies doing that. So there would have been a lot of the racial animus of living separately, doing business separately, would have been bridged if we had been allowed to develop our own business models and to work them in a societal building way. So what was lost there continues to be lost in America and has been at the throat of the battle for compensation, for rectification, for rehabilitation, for reparations to the damage done, not only to the African American community, but to this country.
So, Reggie, what do you think? What's next? What do we do next? When I say we, I don't mean we, Black America. I mean we, America. What needs to happen now, aside from the conversations, which is where it starts? But beyond that, what do you think needs to happen?
I think if everyone who hears this takes one thing away from this, please take away vote. Go vote and change our administration. I would normally not tell someone who to vote for, but I will certainly tell you somebody to vote against. Vote against putting this man back in office. And at the time that we're doing this interview, we're sitting 1 week from where this man is coming to Tulsa on Emancipation Proclamation, June 19th celebration date.
Right.
To come, and he's going to be giving his speech about his campaign for presidency, but also about his ideas, thoughts, and I'm sure some poorly thought out restitution way of bringing Black folks back into the mainstream in the country. There will be some archaic, nonsensical plan that he'll put in that will never work.
Do you think he's actually going to reveal some sort of a plan on that day?
I think he's got to say something in light of the fact, the heat that he's taking for showing up and saying anything.
Yeah, on that day.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't expect that he's going to say anything of value, but he's certainly going to say some things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I tell you how concerned I am about not only what he's saying or will say, but about race relations, not only in this country, but in particular in Tulsa. I have spent the better part of the last couple of days since his announcement talking to my friends on the ground in Tulsa and advising them to not go out and protest during the time of his appearance, to not listen to him, because I have great concerns that if violence could break out any place at a Trump rally, it will be next Friday in Tulsa. And the powers that be, I shouldn't say the powers that be, because they've got a great mayor right now. They've got a great police chief right now. But the animus runs so deep, and the far-right Republican conservative organizations that are at the base of Trump's support, the gun support and lobby, is so strong there on the ground in Tulsa, so vocal, so active, that given their proclivity to violence back in 1921, I can easily see that being duplicated and a new generation taking up arms, and people ended up losing their lives as a result of this poorly planned and thought out photo op, soundbite seeking campaign appearance that Trump is making. I don't want them to be part of his audience for him to then misidentify as, look at the great support. Black people came out to hear me speak. No.
Yeah.
I prefer a day of absence. I prefer that the crowd shots show that there's nothing but rabid white people jumping up and down, screaming, wearing red hats, talking about make America great again. And if you ask them, when was that? They can't answer that question. Exactly.
Are your friends in Tulsa listening to you? What's the vibe you're getting about what it's going to be like?
Yes, they're listening, but they also, it's a tough pill to swallow at this time in the country. Mm-hmm. When people are been in the streets over the Floyd issue,
right,
and the police brutality issues, and these folks who have been docile in Tulsa, the Black folks, who've not raised nearly as much hell as they should have about what they've experienced and been through, and the ongoing disrespect of their community still faces. It's still a food desert without mm-hmm. restaurants, without grocery stores, without significant business opportunities, despite the development zone that continues to get smaller because white businesses see the value in the land and come steal that land rather than provide resources and opportunity for them, the Black community, to exploit those communities, their own properties, and build and support those businesses. But that's still going on there. They're conflicted as to how they should behave. But they also have to deal with being humbled and recognizing that they are outnumbered, outgunned, and in a place that voted 36% higher for Trump in 2016 than they did for Hillary Clinton. And before then, Barack Obama didn't win a single precinct in the state of Oklahoma. So when you have that as the backdrop in your community, you're prudent to be apprehensive to go out in the street and to evoke or be exposed to violence.
Last question. How are you doing as a Black man in America, who I know has had your own stories to deal with through the years? How are you doing?
I'm a cerebral man by nature, but I'm spending too much time in my head as a result of this shelter in place, this quarantine, and this quagmire that's going on around me in the streets outside. And the political climate that we live in all make it very difficult to spend this much time alone in your head and thinking about the realities of what's going on outside your head. So looking for an escape becomes mandatory. But if you're also a person of faith, you feel like you have to continue to work to make things better. And as someone who considers himself to be quite blessed, I'm fortunate that I'm not economically stressed at this point. I'm not worried about losing my job. I still would worry about dealing with any interactions with the police. So you can be educated, you can be financially sound, but as long as your complexion, as long as your skin is considered a weapon, you're always going to be accused of being armed. So if you're going to be thought to be armed, you need to be armed and prepared. For me, that's my mind as my weapon, my heart is my weapon. But I don't sleep well knowing that others who don't think, others who don't feel, have access and ownership of military weapons, who are right outside my door, who have a cheerleader in the White House egging them on. So how am I doing? I'm doing what a Black man does in 2020, trying to survive.
You keep surviving, my friend. And thank you for your amazing work and for what you are doing to uncover the truth and to make sure that it's known. So thank you, and you be well, okay?
Doing my part. Thank you, my friend. Love you. See you soon.
Love you too. Okay. All right. Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Tulsa Project and follow the work that Reggie continues to do, we've posted all the information on our website, ourvoicesmatterpodcast.com, as well as information about how to order a DVD if you'd like to see the film, or perhaps show it in a school setting, or even arrange a screening. It's all there on the website. Once again, thank you for giving Reggie Turner permission to speak and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. We'll see you next time.